We do not want a war. We will beat you without a war. We are going to beat you technologically. We're going to beat you culturally. We're going to beat you militarily. We're going to beat you every dimension of power that you can imagine. And this latest edict by Xi Jinping, which the American press has completely missed as far as I can tell, and this latest one says we are essentially triumphant in every element of global power but one. Now we're going to take on that one. And that one is financial control.
大家好，欢迎来到本期视频。先介绍一下背景啊，主持人塔克·卡尔森，他曾是美国福克斯新闻的收视率之王，后来被解职。单飞之后，他的立场发生了180度大转弯，从体制内的顶流变成了体制外最大嘴巴的刺头，专门揭露和抨击美国政府的战争谎言以及权力黑幕。不管外界如何争议，如何给他贴标签，他反而更加我行我素。他目前也是保守派里反犹的主力。嘉宾也是个重量级的人物，劳伦斯·威尔克森，美国陆军退役上校。他曾在美国军政最核心的地带深耕数十年，担任过美国前国务卿科林·鲍威尔的幕僚长。2003年，鲍威尔在联合国安理会里拿出一小管白色粉末，声称伊拉克拥有大规模杀伤性武器。随后，美国在没有经过联合国授权的情况下悍然出兵。这场改变了整个中东命运的战争，其关键演讲背后的情报材料正是由威尔克森负责审核和筛选的。退役之后，他成了美国建制派的叛徒。他公开爆料伊拉克战争，并声称我参与了一场愚弄美国人民、国际社会和联合国安理会的骗局。不仅如此啊，他还公开揭露美国驻军阿富汗根本不是为了什么反恐和重建，真正的目的之一是要搞乱新疆，破坏中国的一带一路战略。我相信很多观众应该都对这一幕有印象。当年华春莹在外交部记者会上公开播放的那段视频，里面那个爆料的人就是他。好，介绍差不多了，我们来看整篇吧。
What is China's role in this conflict?
It's a role, I think, forced upon them at the moment. Not that they can't handle it. They seem to be quite adaptable with regard to this very frenetic and indeterminate presidency and empire. But it's forced on them because they didn't think that this was going to happen in the way that it's happened, I think. That is to say, this being the war of choice with Iran. And some things are happening in the war that are probably disturbing to them. For example, the latest completed railroad in their 5 base road initiative railroads was probably the most strategic one in many ways. It brings China's Pacific ports all the way around on land, and then intended was up the Persian Gulf along the old route that we used to resupply the Soviet Union during World War II, and eventually into the Caucasus and beyond. And now we're bombing it. Israel and we are bombing that railroad. Now, of course, railroads don't get bombed very well. You could drop all the ordnance in the world on them and they'll get a bunch of people out there and repair them pretty quickly. But nonetheless, it shows that there's something more to this war of choice than perhaps even Trump knows about. I'm sure there are people in the Pentagon who know about it. That are happening, and the world is basically ignorant of it.
Well, can you expand on that? There are things happening the president doesn't know about, but that some planners at the Pentagon doubtless do. What would those things be?
Well, one of them is bombing that railroad. It just started recently with both Israel and the United States making it a principal target. And one of the things they're trying to do, of course, and this is a hugely geostrategic issue that most people don't, I'm not even sure I understand it completely, but if you go back in time to earlier empires, when the real power, cultural, technological, economic, military, and otherwise, was in the East, you see one of the ways that those empires roughly defeated other empires by shifting maritime commerce to the land, because maritime commerce was simply becoming too expensive for them. They put the Portuguese Empire out of business, for example. And what they did was they shifted along one of their routes, primary routes was this route China's now using to eventually go up the Persian Gulf and into Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia, the Caucasus, and on northward, marrying up with the other 3 base road initiative railroads, which incidentally have been adumbrated seriously by the war in Ukraine. Does that ring a bell with anybody geostrategically? They're not emptying into Europe as they were intended to do. They've stopped pretty much. And what does that do? Well, basically, those railroads mean that instead of 2.5 to 3 days and very expensive maritime shipping for China's Pacific port produce, it's 16 hours into the heart of Europe. That's a huge change, one that will drive a lot of commerce off the seas and will, to a certain extent, negate the Bab el-Mandeb, the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, maybe even the Panama Canal. Although China's built that very, very luxurious, state-of-the-art port on the west coast of Peru, but that's looking toward the Pacific and looking toward that aspect of commerce. So don't expect a lot of that to be going through the canal even. These railroads are a game changer in terms of commerce. And think about this for a moment, in terms of one of the United States' supposedly great strengths, its maritime power, because we won't need to police the seas anymore. It'll all be going over land.
I think a lot of Americans are at a great disadvantage in understanding this because they lack a sense of the mechanics of commerce. Products just appear. It's not clear how. And they lack a sense of geography. The idea that, Iran, you could reach China from Iran overland. People, I think, lack the perspective of how exactly that would happen. But clearly the Pentagon understands these questions, right? So they're bombing that railroad for a reason, which would be what, do you think?
Well, to set it back and to tell China we know what they're doing and we don't like it. That route is such a serious threat in and of itself because of what you look at in terms of commerce during the period immediately prior to World War II, when Britain and the United States sneaked into Iran, and I mean that, we sneaked in there. They were Nazi sympathizers at the time. And we built a road and we flanked it with security. And at that time, the Iranians couldn't challenge it very much. And we shipped all manner of goods up that road into the belly of the Soviet Union. Stalingrad would have never held out without that supply route. Hundreds of thousands of trucks and wheel vehicles and other implements of war went up that route. It was second only to Murmansk, and in terms of strategic effect, it was more important than Murmansk. How many Americans even know that? How many Americans even knew that at the time?
Right.
So it's a real game changer in terms of the United States. If it has to do anything about China viscerally, if it has to go to war with China, if it has to fight them, it's essential that we control these lines of communication, and we're not.
So what's the Chinese perspective on this?
As it has been ever since Deng Xiaoping started capitalism with Chinese characteristics. We do not want a war. We will beat you without a war. We are going to beat you technologically. We're going to beat you culturally. We're going to beat you militarily. We're going to beat you every dimension of power that you can imagine. And this latest edict by Xi Jinping, which the American press has completely missed, as far as I can tell, he put out the latest in a series of edicts that have come from Chinese premiers from Deng Xiaoping on. Hu Jintao was a little bit of an aberration. That's one reason they got rid of him. But Xi Jinping has been right in there. And this latest one says, we are essentially triumphant in every element of global power but one. Now we're going to take on that one. And that one is financial control. And that means the renminbi being substituted for the dollar in everything from oil sales to you name it. It will become the transactional and reserve currency. Already is to a great extent for about 40% of the world. They're going to shoot for 60 to 70% of the world. They're going to drive the Bretton Woods system back where it came from. They're going to eliminate SWIFT. They're going to eliminate our ability to sanction countries. That's one of their major purposes. And that's an altruistic purpose for them. They think eliminating our ability to put sanctions on other countries in the world, through which, since the turn of this century, we have killed 38 million people, mostly men, women, and children. 38 million people. That rivals Stalin's purges, Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution. it almost rivals Hitler in terms of the people that he killed directly in World War II. So we're looking at the United States, and China looks at us this way, as having done that damage in the world with our financial system, which allowed us to put primary and secondary sanctions on 30% of the world. Go to OFAC and see how many countries we have under sanction. It's incredible. We killed 500,000 in Saddam Hussein's Iraq when we had the sanctions on him. Madeleine Albright said when she was confronted with that statistic, so what? It was worth it. Madeleine want to join Hillary in the world of cretins? She did.
Yeah.
This is a serious issue for China, and they want to stop it.
But back to China. So the United States is and with Israel blowing up Chinese-built infrastructure. So that seems like a big step. And it seems like in so doing, you could like risk Chinese further participation in this conflict. Are we risking that?
I think we are. We're not at the cusp yet, I don't think. I'm waiting to see just exactly how we deal with all the Chinese shipping. That would be, I think, a deal breaker and perhaps get China more infuriated and maybe even doing more than she's already doing. But I know, too, I've been in the Central Party School, one of the few Americans who had. I've been in China since 1984 and almost every other year or so. And I've done simulations in Beijing with the Chinese. In fact, I did one in 2009 that was called, are you ready for this? The oil disruption exercise.
No way.
We had everybody there. We had MARAD, we had AIG, we had Lloyd's of London, we had all the countries involved. And we took down Ras Tanura at that time, about 8 million barrels per day productive capacity. And West Texas Intermediate, Brent crude, went to $200 almost overnight. Shippers wouldn't ship, insurers wouldn't insure. And of course, everyone in the room, including the Chinese, this was very instructive, but this was 2009, agreed to allow the United States Navy and the Group of Five, led by Singapore, with their little navy, about one ship per country, police the Strait of Malacca, because that's where we were threatening another act, and let the United States Navy almost exclusively clear the Strait of Hormuz and fix the situation at Ras Tanura. And all it took at that time, because we were much bigger, we put ships in there. We put an aircraft carrier, not too much different from Lincoln right now. And that calmed things down, and people began to realize that if there were further problems, because this was a terrorist attack on Ras Tanura that we postulated, if things were to get out of hand again, the United States Navy was there, and other allied navies were there too. So it calmed down and oil went down again. But very, very dicey moment. It was so dicey on the game floor, Tucker. I've never seen this before, and I've done hundreds of simulations. The Chinese actually, when the move to shift oil reserves around the world to take care of this problem so there wouldn't be a real global depression develop, had to go back to their Ministry of Foreign Affairs and consult before they could come back to the game floor and make a decision.
Wow.
Chaz Freeman, Ambassador Chaz Freeman was there with us. And at breakfast the next day, they didn't know Chaz was fluent in Mandarin. I couldn't believe that, but they didn't. Their intelligence had failed them on that. So we're at breakfast, and I said, Chaz, what was said? And he told me what was said. It was interesting. I mean, they were actually seriously worried about making a decision that took oil at that moment away from China and say gave it to Korea or gave it to some other country like Japan that needed it more desperately than they did, because that's what we did for a time. We divided the oil flows up around the world so they'd be more economic and more helpful to countries that were being hurt. That was the last time I saw a real camaraderie between I think that's a fair term to use, too, between Chinese diplomats, Chinese. We knew that probably 10% of the Chinese delegation was intel. Ours was, too. But that was the last time I saw comity, and I saw willingness to work together in a significant way. And that was a dicey situation, very dicey on the game floor.
How does it get reopened now, do you think?
I think it's going to have to be the force of the reality of what we're doing to the globe. I'm looking very closely at economic analyses that tell me by the end of June, if we're not back to reasonable shipping again, we'll be certainly in recession, global recession. And if we go to the end of August, we might be in global depression. And Putin and Trump can say over and over again that we have plenty of LNG and plenty of oil and everything. It doesn't matter. You're not going to survive in that kind of autarkic sense. Economically, you're going to crash too. So we would be looking, I think, at not only that coming to impact us, and at the same time, our incredible debt, coupled with the fact that Xi Jinping would probably accelerate the replacement of the dollar with renminbi because it would be a moment to do it.
Yeah. So at that point, I mean, you could see chaos, right? I mean, economic.
Yes.
Right.
好了，本期视频就到这里了。本频道仅代表个人观点，欢迎大家在评论区理性交流和补充。另外，制作视频不易，如果您觉得做得不错，感谢您动动手指，一键3连。如果您有更多的想法或建议，也可以在评论区告诉我，我都会看见。我们下期见。